So, when I was very young, about 5 or 6, I had this strange dream. I was alone in the driver's seat of my car, driving down the hill from my house to downtown. And as I was driving, I came to the terrifying realization that I didn't know how the brake or accelerator pedals worked. So, I was steering around these increasingly sharp turns, and just before I was about to spin out of control, I woke up. This dream came back to me several times a year for the next 10 years of my life. I always woke up before anything bad happened, but it left me feeling really scared and agitated when I woke. It was a very emotionally trying dream. However, when I turned 15 and a half, I got my driver's permit. And of course, my dad took me out to teach me how to drive, and the first thing he taught me was how to use the brake or accelerator pedal. And that was the last I ever heard of those dreams. Now, this got me interested because there was no rational explanation for those dreams to have been haunting me. I don't fear driving. I've never been in a car accident, and logically, it didn't seem like there was a clear explanation. And yet, they played an extremely pivotal role in my early childhood. This is what initially got me interested in dreams. Today, I'll be talking about the history of dreams, the science behind them, and then some of what you can do with your own dreams. Let's start with the history of dreams. There's a very important distinction that needs to be made between how our society views dreams and how ancient and other civilizations do. We view dreams as coming from internally, from our minds. However, other civilizations often view dreams as coming from an external source. Really good examples are the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Egyptians. They actually thought that when you dreamed, you were physically transported into another world. Another example were the Greeks. The Greeks had such strong belief in the power of dreams that they would actually keep a dream interpreter on hand, and before making any important political decisions like going to war, the government would consult them. That would be like Barack Obama in modern day having a dream interpreter in the White House and talking to him before he decided to make any policy decisions. Dreams also play a really big role in Christianity. An example is when, biblically, Joseph is having an internal struggle over whether to believe Mary that her child is from God. God is sent to actually send Joseph a dream that says, yes, the child is mine. And this is a very clear example of dreams coming from an external source. However, this doesn't only apply to ancient civilizations. I'm sure many of you have heard of vision quests, and those are actually still very present today. What a vision quest is that in some Native American communities, when a child is on the cusp of adulthood, he or she will go off into the forest for usually like 2 to 3 days without any food or water, and wait for a dream to approach them. And when it does, it'll bring them information about both what their job is to do in their tribe, as well as some personal information. So that's a very clear example of external dreams in modern day. One of the first people to present the idea that dreams come from within rather than an external source was Plato. Plato said that if you pay attention to your dreams, they can actually give you information about how to behave in your own life, how to live a good life. And Aristotle then followed this up by saying that, hey, maybe those images in dreams are actually symbols of things in conscious life. So this will probably remind a lot of you of some later scientists. Sigmund Freud was a German psychologist. He lived in the second half of the 19th century. And he did an incredible amount with dream interpretation. And his main contributions to dream science were his three-pronged consciousness, the id, ego, and superego. What he said was that the id is your subconscious. It's kind of this massive pool of all these animalistic desires, the need to procreate, the need to eat, that sort of thing. On top of that sits the ego. The ego is your conscious self. This is your persona, how you hold yourself. And on top of all of that is the superego. And this is your morality. This is, your mom saying it's important to have good dinner manners, that kind of thing. And the job of the superego is to keep the ego in check, to keep the id in check. And what Freud said was that when your id gets out of control, you start developing neuroses. And he said that by examining your dreams, you could find a solution to this. So, a famous example of his is his Oedipus complex. Freud presented this idea that every human male has the suppressed desire to sleep with his mother and therefore sees his father as a challenge, and that by analyzing dreams and the subconscious, Freud thought that you could find a solution to this problem and fix it. However, his student Carl Jung broke from him on this point. Jung didn't like Freud's kind of overtly sexual take on things. He was much more mystical. Jung spent many years traveling around the world to these very obscure, isolated communities. And he talked to them about their dreams. And what he found was very interesting. He discovered that there are a series of images and stories that apply to all these different groups that seem to have nothing in common. They never interacted before. An example is the flood story. Every founding story, every creation story has a flood aspect. The one that comes most readily to most people's mind is that of the flood in Genesis. However, in the Hawaiian Kumulipo, there is also an aspect of a flood. So I thought that was really interesting. And Jung called these archetypes, these recurring images. And what he said was that these archetypes resided in a fourth level of consciousness that was below Freud's id, ego, and superego. And he said this level of consciousness is called the collective unconscious. And the best example I could think of for this was when you buy a new computer and it has these preloaded programs on it, like Microsoft Word, that kind of thing. And then, as you can get more extensions as you go on. And Jung would say that that's what the collective unconscious is, those initial preloaded programs. He would say that all of you members of the audience, you have this collective unconscious. You have these images within you. So I thought that was very, very interesting. So getting into a little more of the modern science behind it, I thought I'd start off with discussing one hypothesis for dreams, the purpose of dreams, that has actually been disproven, but for a long time it served as the basis for dream science. And that is the activation synthesis hypothesis. And that's a mouthful. But what it means, essentially, is that the scientist Sander van der Linden presented this idea that dreams don't actually have any, they don't pull from the real life at all. What they are is a random firing of synapses in your brain. And your brain presents all of these images. And when you wake up, your conscious self says, oh no, what was that? That was a mess. I need to order this. And it creates a kind of incoherent storyline that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You know, in dreams, things don't really seem to line up very well. And van der Linden said this is because they aren't supposed to. However, there have actually been some studies done, and dreams have been found to pass through both the visual cortex and the amygdala and hippocampus, which are parts of your brain that deal with emotion. So there has been proof that dreams do draw from real life, but for a long time this was the basis of dream science. So one theory that I really like is the threat simulation theory. And what this is the concept that dreams are actually an evolutionary advantage. Because what they allow the dreamer to do is get an event. For instance, if you've ever had a very traumatic dream about maybe a family member dying, something like that, you know when you wake up that the events weren't real, but the emotions sure were. And what this theory says is that because these dreams prepare your brain for that kind of very powerful and sometimes painful emotional stimulus, it allows you to better react to them in conscious life. So I have kind of a lighthearted example to relate to this. So it was a couple months ago, it was like the tail end of winter break, and I was getting ready to go back to school. And I'd been stressing about stuff, and you know, it was school. So in my dream, it was the first day back at school, but I wasn't feeling very much like myself. For those of you that don't know me, I take school very seriously, and I like it a lot, but in the dream, I didn't want to be there, I wasn't that into it. I actually left halfway through the day to go home. And so at the end of the day, I came back to school, and I was getting my books, and one of my teachers said, okay, Lauralei, I need to talk to you. And she pulled me over, and I said, okay, well, what is it? And she goes, Lauralei, you're missing 36 assignments. I cannot possibly expect to give you an A in this class when you're missing so much work. So at first I was like, okay, that's completely ridiculous. Like, it's the first day of school. There's no way I'm missing 36 assignments. But on the other hand, there was this very interesting aspect of guilt in my emotional reaction. I hadn't been present at school. I'd been blowing it off. It didn't matter to me. And when I woke up, I kind of looked at that and I said, hey, that's weird. That sticks with me. That has an effect. So because of that dream, I looked at some of the stuff that I've been doing in conscious life. And I'd been putting too much pressure on myself about school. And I'd been stressing myself out over things that I shouldn't have been. So because of that dream, it really did equip me to deal with things in real life. So I thought that was interesting, and I really like this theory. And one last thing I'd like to talk to you guys about with the dream science is this very interesting syndrome called the Charcot-Wilbrand syndrome. And what this is a complete inability to dream. And I'm sure a lot of you have interacted with people say, oh no, I don't dream. But the reality of the situation is that what probably happens is they don't remember their dreams, which is very common. Dreams, you forget the majority of your dreams when you wake up. However, with this syndrome, you truly cannot dream at all. And what this does is that it allows these fantastic scientific discoveries. For instance, when I was saying earlier that that first dream theory had been disproven, it was a direct result of a woman who had this syndrome. She could not dream, and the only brain abnormality she had was in her visual cortex, which scientists then did more research and discovered that the implication was maybe dreams weren't created in the visual cortex, but it played a big role in them. And this created a clear line between conscious life and the subconscious life. So I thought that was very interesting, and just the inability to dream. So now I'll talk some about what you guys can do with your own dreams. So the first thing to do with any kind of dream interpretation, or if you're at all interested in your dreams, is remembering them in the first place, which is much harder than you might think if you've never tried. And the first and foremost step is to keep a dream journal. And I would suggest keeping it right by where you sleep, and the moment you wake up, writing down whatever you can remember. Because actually within 5 minutes of waking up, you forget 90% of your dreams, which I thought was a lot when I heard that, but it's actually pretty, when I was thinking about it, it seems to apply pretty well. And so that would be the first step. And one thing I thought was really cool when I was doing my research, was this kind of instruction manual to remembering archetypal dreams, Jung's dreams from earlier. These big dreams that all humans are said to have. And what it said was, you want to be looking for very big, kind of colorful mandala-like designs, weird emotions that you wouldn't normally have, talking and wise animals, and the sensation of flying, floating, or falling, and then a very linear timeline to the dream, which I thought was the coolest part. Because as I'm sure most of you know, when you dream, things don't really line up. At one point you're talking to your sister, and then suddenly she turns into your friend. You're at school, and then suddenly you're at work, all over the place. But in these kind of archetypal dreams, they said that there'll be a very clear progression of events, and from that it'll be easier to detect. So those are some instructions. I don't know if you buy into that at all, but if you do, I thought that was interesting. Dreams fall into a rare category of subjects that are both non-confrontational and interesting. Next time you're in a group of people, try this. Go up to them and say, "Hey, I had the weirdest dream last night." There'll be an immediate reaction. People saying, "Oh, what was it?" Or, "I had one too." Or even, "I don't dream." So it seems like so many things in modern day are built to tear us apart rather than bring us together. Politics and economic issues and social issues, all of them create barriers between people rather than unifying us. Dreams even the playing field for everyone. In your subconscious, there are no politics or economics or social issues. It's all the same. So on the subject of everything being connected, I would encourage all of you to go out and put more emphasis on your dreams. Think about them, write them down, talk about them with people. And who knows, you might find out something about yourself along the way. Thank you.